My name is Zeph. I used to believe marriage was built on love, on trust. That family was supposed to protect you. But that night, that dinner, I learned just how wrong I was. It started with a slap, my mother-in-law's hand across my face in front of everyone. But worse, my wife, the woman who promised to stand by me, laughed. I should have seen the signs, the cold glances, the whispers, the way they always made me feel like an outsider in my own home. But I ignored it. I told myself I was imagining things, until I wasn't. Because that slap, that wasn't just about power. It was a message, a warning, and it was only the beginning. What do you do when the people you love the most turn against you? Because I had to find out the hard way. And what happened next? I never saw it coming. The clinking of fine crystal glasses, the soft murmur of carefully curated conversations, and the scent of perfectly seasoned steak filled the air. I sat at the long dining table, surrounded by the Vane family, people who never truly accepted me. I had done my best to play the part, smiling when expected, nodding at Armand's self-indulgent tales of business conquests, pretending not to notice Lavinia's amused glances in my direction whenever Violora made a cutting remark about self-made men. Violora sat at the head of the table, poised, elegant, and as venomous as ever. She barely acknowledged my existence, except when she was making it painfully clear that I did not belong here. Isolde, my wife, the woman I had built a life with, sat beside me, her face perfectly neutral. She neither defended me nor joined in their disdain, but her silence had always spoken volumes. I reached for my glass of wine, my arm barely brushing against Violora's sleeve. That's when it happened. A sharp crack echoed through the room as Violora's hand struck my face. The entire table fell into silence. I barely had time to register the sting before her voice sliced through the air. "How dare you touch me, you disgusting man!" My ears rang. My mind scrambled to process what had just happened. I turned to Isolde. Surely she would say something. Surely she would. She laughed. It was a soft, breathy chuckle at first, then it grew louder. My wife, my partner, laughing. The sting of the slap was nothing compared to the burn of that sound. I looked at the others. Lavinia smirked, swirling the wine in her glass as though this was the most amusing dinner entertainment she had ever witnessed. Armand leaned back in his chair, a satisfied gleam in his eyes, watching me as if I were an animal in a cage, predictable, powerless. Valora wiped her sleeve as if my mere presence had sullied her. "Apologize," she said, her tone dripping with disdain. "Apologize." I stared at her, willing myself to stay calm. I had tolerated their insults for years, endured their passive-aggressive comments, their thinly veiled condescension. But this was something different. "Zeph, just apologize," Isolde murmured, still smiling as if this was a trivial misunderstanding. "It's not a big deal. Not a big deal." I turned to her, searching her face for any sign that she understood what had just happened, that she cared. But there was nothing. No concern, no hesitation. Only expectation. Armand let out a low chuckle. "You should know better than to act like a brute in this house." Lavinia leaned in slightly, her voice a mockery of sympathy. "Poor thing. Maybe this isn't the right family for you." I stood abruptly, the chair scraping against the marble floor. The weight of their stares pressed down on me, but I refused to look away. I reached up, wiping my cheek where Violora's hand had struck. Then I turned to Isolde, and I walked out. I didn't say a word. I didn't look back. The cold night air hit me as I stepped outside, my chest rising and falling with ragged breaths. I reached my car, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles turned white. The slap, the laughter, the looks on their faces, it all replayed in my mind, over and over. They thought they had humiliated me. They thought this was the end of the story. They had no idea. This wasn't just a dinner. This was war. The city lights blurred past as I drove in silence, my fingers tightening around the steering wheel. The night air seeped through the crack in my window, cool and sharp, but it did nothing to cool the fire raging inside me. My cheek still tingled where Violora had slapped me, but that wasn't what burned the most. It was her, Isolde, the way she laughed, the way she looked at me like I was nothing. I gritted my teeth, replaying every second of that dinner, every word, every sneer, every glance exchanged between her and her family. Had she planned it? Had this been the moment they had been waiting for? A sinking feeling settled in my stomach, crawling up my spine like ice. I had spent years building a life with her, trusting her, believing that despite everything, she was different from them. But that laughter told me everything I needed to know. By the time I pulled into the driveway, my thoughts were a storm of fury and suspicion. I slammed the car door shut, took a deep breath, and walked inside. The house was quiet. Too quiet. I headed straight to the liquor cabinet, pouring myself a drink with shaking hands. The whiskey burned down my throat, but it didn't dull the gnawing anxiety creeping into my bones. I needed to do something, anything to keep my mind from spiraling. My laptop sat on the counter, half open, and before I even fully registered the thought, I was already typing. Just a quick check, just to ease my paranoia. I logged into our shared financial accounts, watching the screen load. Then, my blood ran cold. The numbers weren't right. I refreshed the page, checked another account, then another. They were empty. I straightened, my pulse hammering in my ears. My stomach twisted as I clicked through the transaction history. The money hadn't just vanished. It had been moved. Isolda's name appeared on every transfer. My breath hitched. The credit cards, maxed out. Our joint savings, gone. Every single shared asset we had, now legally under her name alone. My hands clenched into fists. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't some banking error. This was deliberate, and she had been planning it for months. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. Every time I had asked her about our finances and she brushed me off. Every secretive phone call. Every casual dismissal when I mentioned Violora, always insisting that I trust Isolde to manage things. I swallowed hard, trying to steady my breathing. My mind raced, flashing back to the countless moments I had ignored, the times I had convinced myself I was overthinking. I pulled up another tab, searching for property records, legal documents, anything that could confirm what I already knew. And there it was, documents showing. A slow, cold rage crept up my spine. Isolde didn't just betray me, she robbed. The front door clicked open. I shut the laptop, shoving the glass of whiskey aside as she stepped into the house, heels clicking against the hardwood floor. Her face was calm, unreadable, like nothing had happened. She set her purse down, smoothing her perfectly pressed dress as she walked past me toward the kitchen. I stared at her. She knew, and she didn't even care. I didn't realize I had spoken until I heard my own voice, low, steady, laced with barely contained fury. "Where's our money, Isolde?" She turned slowly, her lips curling into something. She didn't flinch, didn't even pretend. Instead, she tilted her head, studying me like I was an inconvenience. "Our money?" she echoed, her voice smooth, unbothered. Then she smirked. "Oh, honey, it's always been my—" I took a step toward her, my chest rising and falling in uneven breaths. All of it. I could see it now. She picked up a glass, filled it with water, and took a slow sip before speaking again. "You're acting so dramatic, Zeph," she said lightly. "It's just a financial adjustment." I let out a slow breath, forcing myself to stay calm. She was gaslighting me. She wanted me to explode, I clenched my jaw. Instead, I took a step back, exhaling through my nose as my mind raced. I should have seen this coming. The warning signs had been right there, but I saw them now. I saw. And if she thought I was just going to roll over and take this, if she thought I was going to let her win, she didn't know who she was dealing with. The house was silent, but my thoughts were deafening. I sat in my home office, the dim glow of my laptop casting shadows across the room. The empty bank accounts glared back at me from the screen, a stark reminder of how thoroughly Isolde had dismantled everything I thought we had built together. She planned this. That much was clear. But why? The money. The cold dismissal. Valora's arrogance at dinner. It wasn't just about control. It was something more, something deeper. If she had been lying about our finances, what else had she been lying about? My gut twisted. I leaned back in my chair, rubbing a hand over my face. I had been so blind I started noticing things I should have questioned long ago. Isolde had been staying out later than usual these past few months. At first, she made excuses, late meetings, social events, family obligations, but the details were always vague, always shifting. She guarded her phone like it held the launch codes to nuclear war, and the intimacy between us, that had vanished long before tonight. I had chalked it up to stress, to distance, to the natural wear of marriage. But now I knew better. I reached for my glass of whiskey, taking a slow sip, trying to drown out the rising paranoia curling in my chest. Then I made a decision. I stood, my movement steady despite the storm raging inside me. She was asleep upstairs. Her phone was likely beside her on the nightstand. If she had nothing to hide, I'd find nothing. I moved through the house like a ghost, the floorboards beneath my feet creaking softly. The bedroom was dark, save for the faint glow of the moon through the curtains. Isolde lay curled under the covers, breathing evenly. Peaceful. My stomach twisted at the sight. I reached for her phone, locked, my jaw clenched. She never used to set a password. I placed it back exactly where I had found it, then turned toward her desk. Her laptop sat closed, sleek and untouched. I pressed the power button, but the login screen demanded a password. Another lock. Another barrier between me and the truth. I stepped back, forcing myself to stay calm. She had sealed. That only meant one thing. I left the room, my heartbeat pounding in my ears as I moved back downstairs. If I couldn't get into her devices, I'd check something she couldn't hide as easily. I logged into our home security system, scanning the recent activity logs. Then I saw it. The front door had been unlocked and relocked at odd hours each time, just after midnight, and one date stood out immediately. My fingers flew across the keyboard as I cross-checked everything. One gut instinct led to another, and soon I was combing through old emails, backup drives, anything that might give me a clearer picture. Then I found it. A folder, hidden deep in our shared computer files. My pulse thundered as I clicked it open. Hotel reservations, text message screenshots, receipts. They were all tied to one name, someone from her past. Someone I never. My hands curled into fists. I scrolled through the messages, bile rising in my throat. They went back long before the money disappeared, long before she started treating me like an afterthought. This wasn't just about betrayal. She wasn't just stealing from me. She was a future with a strangled sound escape my throat, something between a laugh and a growl. Every moment we had shared, every promise, every whispered vow, every fight we had pushed through together, it was all a lie. I stared at the damning evidence on the screen, my vision blurring with a rage so deep I could taste it. I had spent years loving a woman who never saw me as anything more than a stepping stone. She never saw me as her equal, and now she thought she had won. A slow, dark smile crept across my face. If she wanted to destroy me, she should have done a better job. Sleep never came. I spent the rest of the night sitting in the dim light of my office, staring at the cold, undeniable proof of Isolde's betrayal. My fingers twitched, hovering over my phone more times than I could count. I wanted to call her out. I wanted to tell her I knew everything, but something held me back. She had been meticulous, too meticulous. The financial transfers, the hidden reservations, the secrecy. She wasn't working alone. That thought settled deep in my gut like a rock. Valora. I should have known. She had orchestrated every part of my humiliation at that dinner. Why stop there? By the time dawn broke, I was still in the same position. My body ached from exhaustion, but my mind refused to rest. I ran a hand over my face and exhaled. I needed air. I stepped outside, the crisp morning breeze biting against my skin. The neighborhood was still, but something felt wrong. Across the street, a black SUV sat idling, its tinted windows giving nothing away. I narrowed my eyes. It had been there yesterday, and the day before. A coincidence? Maybe. But after last night, I wasn't willing to believe in coincidences anymore. The uneasy feeling followed me as I walked back inside. I locked the door behind me, scanning the space. A nagging thought whispered in the back of my mind. Was I being watched? I shook my head, forcing myself to push past the paranoia. Maybe I was jumping to conclusions. Maybe I was reading too much into... Then I saw it. The trash can in the corner of the kitchen. I never left it like that. Tilted, the lid slightly ajar. My stomach twisted. Someone had been here. I walked over, my pulse quickening. The bag inside had been shifted, as if someone had gone through it. I yanked it out, sifting through receipts and discarded papers. And then, beneath the crumpled garbage, I found it. A small black device. A tracker. A cold chill spread down my spine. I stood there, gripping the tiny device between my fingers. Someone had placed this here. Someone had been monitoring me. I swallowed hard, my mind racing. If they had planted this, what else had they done? I moved through the house, searching every corner, checking vents, under furniture, near the windows. My skin prickled as I found 3 more. This wasn't just paranoia. Someone was. I hurried back to my office, pulling up my laptop, diving into the security logs. I scanned the system, checking for anything unusual. And then, there it was. Multiple unauthorized logins. Someone had accessed my Wi-Fi, repeatedly. And it wasn't just from one location. The IP addresses varied, but they all pointed back to one thing: surveillance. My emails, my browsing history, even my private messages, someone had been watching. The realization hit like a brick to the chest. Valora. This wasn't just about ruining me financially. I leaned back, exhaling slowly. She wasn't just trying to hurt me. She wanted to make sure I clenched my fists, anger simmering just beneath the surface. If that was the case, I needed to test something. I reached for my phone and made a call. An old business partner, one I hadn't spoken to in over a year. Someone Valora would have no reason. The conversation was short, casual. I barely said anything incriminating, just enough to suggest I was thinking about moving money into a separate account, just enough to make it seem like I was planning. Then I waited. Hours passed. I tried to act normal, tried to keep myself occupied. Then, just before noon, my phone rang. I answered, my heart already hammering. Valora's voice slithered through the speaker, smooth and composed. "Still clinging to the past, are we?" My grip tightened around the phone. She knew. She had been watching, tracking, listening, and now she wanted me to know. I didn't say anything. "You need to stop fighting, Zeph," she continued. "It's over. Accept it." My blood ran cold. She didn't just know about the call. She knew what I was thinking before I had even acted on it. I swallowed down the urge to respond, keeping my voice even. "Is that a threat?" A low chuckle. "No, darling. It's a warning." The line went dead. I pulled the phone away, staring at the screen, my mind spinning. This was bigger than I thought. Every move I made, every conversation, every plan. I wasn't just being watched, I moved quickly. I shut down my social media, wiped my devices. I bought a new phone, a new laptop. But no matter how many precautions I took, the weight of her presence, it was like struggling against an invisible hand. I stood in front of the mirror that night, staring at my own reflection. A man who had been played, betrayed, stripped of everything. But I wasn't broken. Not yet. I had 2 choices. I took a slow breath. The fear was still there, lurking in the background. But beneath it, something else burned. Rage. Defiance. If she wanted to watch my every move, I'd give her something to see. The morning air was sharp as I stepped out of my car, but it did nothing to clear the weight pressing down on my chest. My office building loomed ahead, a place that had once felt like mine, a space I had built through years of blood, sweat, and sacrifice. Now it felt foreign, tainted. I pushed through the front doors, my footsteps echoing against the sleek marble floor. The receptionist barely glanced at me as I made my way to my office. I needed a distraction, something to anchor me before the rage from last night consumed me entirely. Work had always been that for me. No matter what storm raged in my personal life, this was solid ground. Except, something was off. The first sign came when I opened my laptop. My inbox was eerily empty. Emails from key clients missing, conversations I had been in the middle of wiped clean. I frowned, refreshing the page. Nothing. Then the second sign hit. A major deal, one that had been all but finalized, was suddenly gone. I checked the documents, the contracts. Everything had been in place yesterday. But now, it was as if the deal had never existed. I grabbed my phone and called the client directly. It rang once, twice, then voicemail. I gritted my teeth, scrolling through my contacts, dialing another number. Same result. I leaned back in my chair, tension coiling in my muscles. This wasn't just bad luck. This was orchestrated. A cold realization slithered through my gut. Someone was pulling strings behind the scenes. Someone with power. I already knew who. Armand. The thought of him, his smug, calculating gaze, his effortless cruelty, sent a fresh wave of fury coursing through my veins. But I needed confirmation, and I knew exactly where to get it. An hour later, I sat across from an old colleague at an upscale restaurant, my untouched glass of whiskey sitting between us. The man, Daniel, shifted uncomfortably in his seat, fingers drumming against the table. He had been in the business as long as I had, and he had never been the nervous type. That alone told me everything. "What's going on, Daniel?" My voice was steady, but there was an edge to it. "I've been trying to close deals all week, and suddenly no one will take my calls." He hesitated, eyes darting toward the entrance before finally exhaling. "Zeph, you need to be careful." I leaned forward. "Careful of what?" Daniel ran a hand over his jaw, then lowered his voice. "It's Armand." The words hit like a sledgehammer, but I forced myself to stay composed. Daniel continued, his expression tight. "He's been making calls. A lot of calls. No one in the industry will touch you now." My stomach dropped. "What do you mean, no one?" Daniel sighed. "They're saying you're financially unstable, a liability." He hesitated. "That you have issues, personal ones." I stiffened. He didn't need to elaborate. The implication was clear. Armand was using Vailora's influence, Isolde's betrayal, everything to destroy my professional credibility. It wasn't enough to humiliate me. They were erasing me. I swallowed down the rage bubbling up inside me. "Why?" Daniel hesitated. "You already know why." I clenched my jaw. They had never accepted me as one of them. I had clawed my way up, built something from nothing, while Armand had been born into power. And now that they saw an opportunity to get rid of me, but what they didn't know, what Armand... I pushed my chair back and stood. "Thanks for telling me." Daniel gave me a wary look. "Zeph, listen, whatever you're thinking of doing..." I didn't let him finish. I had already made up my mind. Armand's office was exactly as I remembered, sleek, soulless, filled with expensive things he had never earned. He barely looked up when I stormed inside, his lips curling into a lazy, satisfied smirk. "Well," he said smoothly, "this is a surprise." I slammed my hands down on his desk, leaning in close. "You want to explain why you've been running my name through the mud?" Armand tilted his head, feigning innocence. "I have no idea what you're talking about." I clenched my fists. "Cut the act." He sighed, sitting back in his chair, as if I was boring. "You had a good run, Zeph," he said, "but you were never one of us." I felt the words like a slap. He leaned forward, voice dropping. "Take the hint and leave while you still have your dignity." I stared at him, rage coiling tight in my chest. I wanted to hit him. I wanted to tear through every smug word coming out of his mouth. But that's exactly what he wanted. So I smiled instead. Then I straightened, adjusting my cuffs like I wasn't... "You think you can erase me?" I said quietly. Armand chuckled, but there was a flicker of something behind his eyes now, uncertainty. "You really don't get it, do you?" His voice lowered. "We're not done yet." I turned toward the door, keeping my voice steady. "Neither am I." And I meant it. The moment I stepped out of his office, I knew this wasn't just about my career anymore. They weren't going to stop. Not until I was nothing, but they underestimated me. They thought I was just another man they could bury. They had no idea what was coming. If they wanted a war, I was ready to burn everything down. The morning air felt unnaturally still as I stepped out of bed. The weight of everything, Isolde's betrayal, Armand's sabotage, Vailora's control, should have crushed me by now. And yet, I felt calm. Too calm. Maybe it was the exhaustion. Maybe it was the fact that I had already lost so much that there was nothing left to fear. Or maybe, deep down, I knew this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. I moved through the house like a man running on autopilot. Coffee, a quick shower. The same morning routine I had followed for years, as if holding on to the smallest semblance of normalcy would keep me grounded. Then I picked up my phone, and the world as I knew it imploded. Missed calls, dozens of them. Texts from people I hadn't spoken to in months. A voicemail from my attorney, his voice tight with concern. And then, the notifications, news alerts, social media tags. A single headline stared back at me from the glowing screen, the words searing into my brain like a brand. Fallen entrepreneur or fraud? My stomach clenched as I scrolled down. Zeph caught in scandal, dark secrets exposed. Another headline. Shocking allegations about his personal and financial life. My pulse pounded in my ears as I opened the first article. Anonymous sources claim that Zeph is an abusive husband, known for his violent temper behind closed doors. Financial misconduct and fraud allegations surface. Sources suggest the businessman has been hiding debts for years. I gritted my teeth so hard my jaw ached. None of it was true. None of it. But that didn't matter. The media didn't care about truth. They cared about spectacle. And someone had fed them exactly what they wanted. I clenched the phone in my hand, every muscle in my body going rigid. Valora. This had her fingerprints all over it. She wasn't satisfied with destroying my marriage. She wasn't content with stripping me of my finances, my career. She wanted to bury me alive. I inhaled sharply, forcing the rage down. I needed to think. I needed to... Another notification lit up my screen, a text from an old friend. Sorry, man, I can't be associated with this. Hope you understand. My breath came out slow and measured. Even my closest allies were backing away. I scrolled through my contacts, my mind racing. Who else had distanced themselves? How many more bridges had been burned without my consent? I barely heard the cup shatter as I slammed it onto the counter. The walls of my life were closing in, faster than I could brace for impact. And in the center of it all was her. The moment I stepped into the house, I heard her. Laughter, light, carefree. Like the world hadn't just crumbled beneath my feet. I followed the sound, my pulse hammering, my fingers curling into fists at my sides. Isolde stood by the window, her phone pressed to her ear, her lips curled into a satisfied smirk. She looked up as I entered, her expression barely shifting. "Oh, hold on," she murmured into the phone. "I think the guest of honor just arrived." She ended the call and turned to me, completely unbothered. I stared at her, something inside me going deathly still. "What the hell did you do?" Her smirk widened, her eyes gleaming with amusement. "Relax, Zeph. It's just business." "Business." I let out a short, humorless laugh. "You're joking." She raised a delicate brow. "Am I?" I took a step forward, my voice dangerously low. "You fed them those stories." She tilted her head, as if considering it. Then she shrugged. "I didn't have to. People love a scandal. All I had to do was guide them in the right direction." My nails dug into my palms. "Why?" I demanded. "Haven't you taken enough?" She rolled her eyes. "Oh, please. You should have known better than to think you could win." There was no regret in her tone, no hesitation, nothing but calculated malice. I had spent years believing she was just another victim of her mother's influence. That deep down, she was trapped, forced into becoming something she wasn't. But I had been wrong. Isolde wasn't a victim. She was Vealora's daughter, through and through. I exhaled slowly, my vision narrowing, every fiber of my being screaming for me to do something, to lash out, to tear through the carefully constructed mask she wore. But I didn't. Not yet. Because now, I saw her for what she really was. And that meant I knew exactly how to destroy her. I straightened, shaking my head. "You should have made sure I was dead first," she scoffed, rolling her eyes as she turned away. "You're being dramatic." I didn't respond. I just smiled. Let her think she had won. For now. The moment I stepped out of the house, the weight that had been suffocating me lifted. I had lost everything. My career, my reputation. Even the people I thought would stand by my side had turned their backs on me. And yet, for the first time in a long time, I felt something dangerous rise in my chest. Clarity. They thought they could bury me. They should have made sure I was dead first. The world had gone quiet, not in the comforting, peaceful way, but in the way that felt unnatural, suffocating, like walking into a room just after the whispers had stopped. It was everywhere, the avoidance, the silence, the looks that lingered just a second too long. I stepped into the cafe, the same place I had been coming to for years. The scent of roasted coffee filled the air, the familiar hum of conversation floating around me. but something had changed. The moment I entered, I felt it. Eyes flicked toward me, then away just as fast. Conversations stuttered, voices lowering, words cut short. At the counter, the barista, a kid who used to greet me with a grin, kept his head down, barely acknowledging my presence. I exhaled slowly, gripping the edge of the counter. "Black coffee," I muttered. A pause. Then he nodded stiffly, moving to make it without a word. I turned, scanning the cafe. A few familiar faces were there, people I had known for years, men I had shaken hands with, people who had once laughed at my jokes. Now, they barely spared me a glance. One man, a former business associate, made direct eye contact, and then, just as quickly, looked away, pretending I wasn't even there. The realization hit like ice water. This wasn't just discomfort. This was deliberate. They were making a choice. I wasn't just falling from grace. I had already hit the ground, and now they were stepping over the body, moving on. The barista set my coffee down without a word. I grabbed it, took one last look around, and walked out. I sat in my car, the cup growing cold in my hands. I should have expected this. I had seen it happening piece by piece, but knowing it was coming didn't make it any easier when it finally arrived. Still, there was one person I could count on, or at least I thought there was. I picked up my phone and scrolled through my contacts. I hesitated only a second before pressing the call button. It rang, once, twice. I held my breath. Then, finally, a voice. "Zeph." Relief surged through me. "Hey man, I need to talk." A pause, a hesitation, then, "Now's not a good time." Something in my chest tightened. "Come on, just for a few minutes." Silence stretched between us before he finally exhaled. "Fine, not here. Meet me at the dock, half an hour." The line went dead. I stared at the screen, my grip tightening around the phone. Not here. He didn't want to be seen with me. That told me everything I needed to know. 30 minutes later, I leaned against the rusted railing of the dock, watching the waves lap lazily against the shore. Footsteps approached from behind. I didn't turn. "Appreciate you meeting me," I said, a sigh. "Yeah, well, it's complicated." I glanced over my shoulder, meeting his gaze. There was something in his eyes, regret maybe, or guilt. I went straight to the point. "Tell me the truth. What are they saying?" He hesitated, running a hand through his hair. "They're saying you're dangerous," he muttered. I let out a sharp laugh. "Dangerous?" He didn't smile. "They're saying you lost it, that you're unstable, that you're lashing out, trying to drag people down with you." My jaw clenched. "And you believe that?" His gaze flickered. "I don't know what to believe, Zeph, but—" He sighed, looking away. "I can't be seen with you. It's too much heat." There it was, the final blow. I stared at him, my chest hollowing out. "You were the last one," I said quietly. "The last person I thought would turn your back on me." He swallowed, eyes darting to the water. "It's not personal." It felt pretty damn personal. "It's survival." I nodded once, stepping back. "Got it." The words hung between us, unfinished, suffocating. He turned, walking away without looking back. I watched him go. Then I left too. My apartment felt different when I walked inside. Colder, emptier, like the walls were closing in. I stood there, staring at the darkened space. The silence wasn't just in the world outside anymore. It had followed me home. I sat down, rubbing a hand over my face. Everything was gone. My career, my reputation, my friends. They had taken everything, and for a second, a brief, fleeting second, I let the darkness creep in. Maybe this was it. Maybe this was the end. Maybe they had won. Then, somewhere in the depths of my mind, a single thought cut through the haze. I am still standing. I sat up, exhaling slowly. If I had nothing left to lose, then I had everything to fight for. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I sat in the dim glow of my laptop, staring at the screen. No more waiting, no more playing defense. They took everything from me, but I was still here. And that was their biggest mistake. The sound of my phone vibrating against the nightstand jolted me from my thoughts. I barely registered the fact that I had fallen asleep at all, my body still tense, my mind still locked in the same relentless cycle of anger and strategy. I reached for the phone, squinting at the unfamiliar number flashing on the screen. For a second, I considered ignoring it. No one had been calling me lately, not unless they were lawyers, journalists, or people trying to cut ties. But something in my gut told me to pick up. I swiped to answer. Silence. Then a voice, soft, careful, almost hesitant. "You don't know me," the woman said, "but I know you." I sat up straighter, every nerve on edge. "Who is this?" She let out a small sigh. "That's not important. What matters is, you need to be ready." A pause. "Because you're about to be exposed." My grip tightened around the phone. "What the hell are you talking about?" There was another beat of silence before a notification flashed across my screen. A message. A link. "Check it," she said. "Then you'll understand." And then she hung up. I stared at my phone for a long second, heart pounding, before tapping the link. The page loaded, and my world detonated. Scandal explodes, Zeph caught in affair with mystery woman. I stared at the headline, a slow, burning nausea creeping up my throat. Beneath it, dozens of pictures. Me sitting in a dimly lit hotel room, a woman draped across my lap. Me stepping out of the same hotel the next morning, disheveled. Me sending texts, intimate, explicit messages to someone whose name I had never heard before in my life. I scrolled down, my fingers tightening into a fist. Receipts. A room booked in my name. Dinners, gifts, all tied back to me. Every piece of the puzzle, perfectly constructed. A frame job, a damn good one. The rage came fast, white-hot and consuming, because I knew exactly who was behind this, and this time, they had overplayed their hand. Storming into Isolde's office was a mistake. I knew it before I even stepped through the door. She was expecting me. The moment I entered, she looked up from behind her desk, her expression serene, her fingers tapping lazily against a file. "Oh," she mused, lips curving into a smirk. "You saw the news?" I slammed the door shut behind me. "Cut the bullshit." She tilted her head, feigning innocence. Now, that's no way to speak to your ex-wife." I took a slow breath, trying to keep my voice steady. "You know it's fake." She shrugged. "Prove it." And there it was, the final brutal piece of the puzzle. This had never been about just ruining my career. It wasn't about the divorce, the money, or even Valora's obsession with control. This was about erasing me. They weren't just tearing me down. They were rewriting who I was. And Isolde, she wasn't a pawn. She wasn't just some woman caught between her mother and her husband. She was just as ruthless as the rest of them. She leaned forward, eyes gleaming with amusement. "You should have walked away when you had the chance." I stared at her, breathing hard, every muscle in my body wound tight with fury. They wanted me to break. They wanted me to lose control, to snap, to lash out. But I wouldn't give them that satisfaction. Instead, I smiled, a slow, dark smile. "You should have made sure I was dead first." Her smirk faltered, just for a second. But I saw it, and that was enough. I walked out of that office, my mind sharper than it had been in weeks. They thought this was checkmate. They thought I was out of moves. They thought I was finished. But they were wrong. If they wanted a villain, I'd give them one. The city skyline stretched out before me as I stepped onto the pavement. The world kept moving. People walked past, laughing, talking, carrying on as if nothing had changed, as if my life hadn't just imploded in a way I hadn't thought possible. I clenched my jaw, inhaling the cold morning air. Number? I wasn't finished, not yet. Not when I still had one final shot left. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I grabbed it, my heart thudding as I read the message. Meeting confirmed, 12 p.m. This is your last chance. Don't mess it up. A flicker of something, hope, lit inside my chest. The contract, the one deal I had left. A high-profile investment I had been cultivating for months, long before Isolde, Valora, and Armand had decided to burn my life to the ground. If I could land this deal, it would be my lifeline, my way back. Everything else was gone, my reputation, my company, my name. But this contract, it was still mine, and I wasn't about to let them take it from me. I walked into the boardroom with my head held high. The room was sleek, floor-to-ceiling windows, polished oak table, a long stretch of chairs occupied by some of the most powerful investors in the industry. I had worked for years to get here, and yet, the moment I stepped inside, I felt it. The shift, the coldness in their eyes, the stiff postures. I reached out to shake the lead investor's hand. He hesitated, a fraction of a second too long, before offering me the barest grip. Something in my stomach twisted. Still, I forced a smile, took my seat, and began my pitch. I had done this 100 times before. I knew every figure, every projection, every strategy inside and out. But none of it mattered. Not today. Not when they had already made up their minds. And then, "We've reconsidered, Mr. Zeph." I stilled. The room was silent. The lead investor folded his hands on the table. "Given the allegations surrounding you, we can't move forward." For a second I didn't breathe. I looked at them, at their neutral, practiced expressions. They weren't just rejecting me, they were erasing me. I exhaled slowly, gripping the armrests of my chair. "This deal is clean. You know it." Silence. I leaned forward, voice controlled but firm. "You're making a mistake." Another beat of silence. Then, "We've made our decision." That was it. The final nail in the coffin. Valora. Armand. They had been pulling strings behind the scenes, calling in favors, poisoning every opportunity I had left. I had come here thinking I could win. I had come here thinking I still had a fighting chance. But they had made sure there was nothing left to fight for. I walked out of the building, my hands shaking at my sides. Everything. They had taken everything. My wife, my career, my reputation. And now, my last shot at rebuilding. I stared at my reflection in the glass windows of the skyscraper. For the first time, I didn't see the man I used to be. The man who believed in playing by the rules. The man who thought hard work and loyalty were enough. That man was dead. And in his place was someone else. Someone sharper. Someone who had nothing left to lose. I pulled out my phone, scrolled through my contacts, and stopped at a name I hadn't called in years. My finger hovered over it for only a second before I pressed dial. The line rang once, twice. Then a voice, deep, familiar, laced with amusement. Well, the man drawled. "Took you long enough." I exhaled, my grip tightening around the phone. "It's time." A chuckle. "I was wondering when you'd say that." Carter chose a bar just outside the city limits. The kind of place where no one asked questions, where conversations got swallowed by the low hum of neon lights and the dull clatter of ice against glass. I sat in the farthest booth, waiting. A part of me wanted to believe this meeting would go differently, that Carter would have a damn good reason for why he hadn't answered my calls for weeks, that he was still my friend. But I wasn't that naive anymore. The moment he walked in, I knew. His shoulders were tense, his gaze flickered everywhere except to me. And when he finally sat down, he exhaled like a man carrying the weight of a decision he couldn't take back. I watched him for a long second, the silence stretching between us like a noose. Then I spoke. "Tell me the truth. How deep are you in this?" Carter flinched, and that was all the confirmation I needed. He ran a hand through his hair, his jaw tight. "Look, man, it's not what you think." I leaned forward. "Then explain." He let out a slow breath, his fingers drumming against the table. "They came to me, Zeph." The words hit harder than I expected. I had spent years building my business, my career. I had played fair, followed the rules, and the whole time, Carter had been selling me out. "How long?" I asked, my voice eerily calm. Carter hesitated. Then, "Since the beginning." I forced my expression to stay neutral, but inside, something fractured. Carter didn't even have the decency to look ashamed. I didn't have a choice, all right? Valora, Armand, they put pressure on me. They made it clear that if I didn't cooperate, I'd be next. I let out a humorless laugh. "So you threw me under the bus to save yourself?" His jaw clenched. "You would have done the same if you were me." I shook my head. "That's where you're wrong." Carter exhaled sharply. "Come on, man. You don't get it. This wasn't personal." I stared at him. "It was personal the moment you took their side." I stood, pulling a few bills from my pocket and tossing them onto the table. Carter tensed. "Wait." I didn't. He reached out, grabbing my wrist. "Come on, Zeph. We were friends." I looked him dead in the eye. "We were friends." Past tense. "You chose your side," I said, my voice low, final. Now, live with it. Then I walked out. I didn't look back. Because I finally understood. I had no one left. I stood on the curb outside, staring at the city skyline in the distance. The weight of the night pressed against my chest, but the pain was already fading. This wasn't sadness, it wasn't regret, it was clarity. I was naive to think I still had allies. They didn't just want to break me, they wanted to erase me. I exhaled slowly, my fists clenching. If I couldn't trust anyone, then I would fight alone. The first sign that something was wrong came with the knock at my door. It was early, too early for anyone to be paying me a visit. A sharp, official-sounding rap against the wood, the kind that made my stomach tighten instinctively. I exhaled, rolled my shoulders back, and pulled the door open. A man in a dark suit stood on the other side, a grim expression on his face. "Zeph Vane?" My jaw clenched. "Who's asking?" He held out a thick envelope. "You've been served." I stared at it for a second. Then, slowly, I took it. The man didn't wait for a response. He turned on his heel and left without another word. The air around me felt too still as I shut the door, my fingers gripping the heavy envelope. Something told me this was going to be worse than anything I had faced before. I was right. I ripped the envelope open, my pulse hammering in my ears. The first line made my breath catch. Petition for a restraining order and civil lawsuit against Zeph Vane. The words blurred for a second. Then I forced myself to keep reading. Plaintiff, Isolde Vane. The accusations hit like a physical blow. Emotional and psychological abuse, controlling behavior, threats. Every word was a dagger straight to my gut. I gritted my teeth and flipped the page. Mr. Vane's pattern of intimidation and cruelty caused significant emotional distress. The plaintiff fears for her safety. What the hell? My hands trembled. This wasn't just an attack. This wasn't just about taking my money or destroying my career. This was meant to bury me, and the worst part, I knew exactly how the world was going to react. I hadn't even set the papers down before my phone started buzzing. At first I ignored it, but then I saw the notifications. Breaking news. Zeph Vane accused of domestic abuse. Isolde Vane bravely speaks out. Justice for Isolde Trends #1 worldwide. I scrolled through the headlines, feeling sick. Disgraced entrepreneur exposed. Court documents reveal shocking allegations. Social media was already convicting me before I even had a chance to speak. He always seemed like a narcissist. Not surprised. Men like him always get away with it. Not this time. How disgusting. I hope he rots. It didn't matter that there wasn't a single shred of truth in any of it. It didn't matter that the only thing I was guilty of was trusting the wrong woman. People wanted blood, and Isolde had just handed them the knife. I sat across from my lawyer, gripping the armrests of my chair. The man adjusted his glasses, flipping through the lawsuit. His face remained unreadable, but I could tell he already knew the answer to my next question. "How bad is it?" I asked, my voice low. The lawyer set the papers down, exhaling. "Bad." I clenched my jaw. "Listen, Zeph," he continued. "This isn't just a lawsuit, it's a full-scale attack. Even if these claims are completely false, the court of public opinion already has its verdict." I leaned forward. "So, what are my options?" He hesitated. "We can fight it, but this could take years to clear up. Meanwhile, your reputation? It's already in the gutter." My stomach twisted. I knew what he was about to say before he even said it. "Or," he continued, "you can settle. Sign an NDA, make it go away quietly." My hands curled into fists. Settle. Admit guilt for something I didn't do. Let them win. I let out a slow, controlled breath. Then I looked my lawyer dead in the eye. "I'm not signing a damn thing." He hesitated. "Zeph, they want to make me the villain." My voice was steady, but something cold was brewing inside me. I pushed back my chair and stood. "Then I'll show them what happens when you push a man too far." I stepped out of the office, the city stretching before me like an open battlefield. I wasn't just fighting for my name anymore. I was fighting for my survival. The night air was thick with an eerie silence, the kind that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. I knew something was coming. I had been waiting for the next blow, expecting it, but I hadn't expected this. The call came just after midnight. My phone buzzed against the glass table, the number flashing unknown caller. I hesitated before answering. "Zeph!" A voice rasped through the line, distorted and unnatural, like it had been altered. I sat up straighter. "Who is this?" A pause. Then the warning came. "They're coming for you. Get out." The call cut off. I stared at my phone, my heartbeat hammering against my ribs. I didn't recognize the voice, didn't know if it was a friend or someone playing games. But my gut told me one thing. This wasn't just paranoia. This was real. The pounding on the door came 3 minutes later, hard, loud, unforgiving. "Mr. Vane, open the door. This is the police." I froze. Every instinct screamed at me to run. But there was nowhere to go. I forced myself to stand, my mind racing. I had done nothing wrong. They couldn't possibly have anything on me. Could they? I unlocked the door. The second it swung open, officers shoved their way in. "Zeph Vane, you are under arrest for financial fraud, harassment, and assault." My stomach dropped. The world blurred as they grabbed my wrists, twisting them behind my back. Metal cuffs bit into my skin. This wasn't just a setup. This was an execution. The interrogation room was cold. Fluorescent lights hummed above me, casting sharp, sterile shadows. I sat with my hands cuffed to the metal table, my fingers stiff from how tightly I'd been clenching them. Across from me, a detective leaned back in his chair, flipping through a thick file. "You've been under investigation for months," he said casually, like this was just another day for him. I didn't respond. He tapped a finger against the paper. "We have witnesses, testimonies, paper trails." I let out a slow breath, steadying myself. Witnesses? Paper trails? Funny, considering I've never committed a crime in my life. The detective barely looked up. "Your accounts show suspicious transactions." My jaw tightened. "Planted." His eyes flicked to mine, studying me. "Your ex-wife claims she felt threatened, claims you've been harassing her." I laughed, sharp, bitter. "She's the one who destroyed my life, but I'm the threat?" The detective shrugged. "The courts don't usually side with the accused in these cases." I leaned forward, my voice low and even. "So, this is how it's going to be?" The detective sighed. "I suggest you cooperate. Things could go a lot worse for you." I stared at him for a long moment, then leaned back in my chair. A slow smirk curled on my lips. "You think this is checkmate?" I murmured. I tilted my head, watching his expression shift. "You haven't seen my next move yet." They thought they had won. They had no idea. I sat in the holding cell, my back against the cold concrete wall, my fingers drumming against my knee. The air was stale, thick with sweat and hopelessness. But I wasn't hopeless, not even close. I was waiting. And waiting was dangerous for the people who put me here. Hours passed, maybe more. I had no way of knowing. The fluorescent lights overhead buzzed like a mosquito trapped in a room, relentless and grating. Then, finally, the metallic clank of the door. My lawyer stepped inside, his face tight, jaw clenched. I stood, stretching the stiffness out of my muscles. "Took you long enough?" "You're not going anywhere," he said, tossing a thick folder onto the table. "They're making sure of that." I sat back down, feigning boredom. "Oh," he exhaled sharply. "The charges are weak, but someone's pulling strings to keep you inside." Valora. Of course it was her. She wasn't just trying to ruin me anymore. She wanted me buried. "Can you fight it?" I asked, keeping my tone even. "I can try," he admitted, "but if you don't have a way to force their hand, this could drag on for months." I tapped my fingers on the table, my mind racing. A way to force their hand. I needed leverage. I needed something they couldn't afford to let see the light of day. And then it hit me. Armand. The second I was back in my cell, I made a call. Not to a lawyer, not to a journalist, to a man who owed me. He picked up after 3 rings. "Haven't heard your voice in years." I cut to the chase. "Tell me everything you have on Armand Vane." Silence, then a chuckle. "Oh, you're gonna love this." And I did. Because Armand wasn't just Violaura's golden boy. He was a criminal, bribery, blackmail, backdoor deals with some very dangerous people, all swept under the rug by his mother's power. If this got out, it wouldn't just destroy Armand. It would cripple Valora's entire empire. And she knew it. I made another call, this time to Armand himself. He answered after the first ring, smug as ever. "Hope you're enjoying your stay. You look good in cuffs." I smiled. "You know what I love about people like you, Armand?" He huffed. "Enlighten me." I leaned forward, my voice dropping. "You always think you're untouchable, until someone proves you wrong." His silence stretched, but I wasn't done. "Your mother spent years cleaning up your messes, but I wonder, how long would it take for the world to see you for what you really are?" His tone sharpened. "What the hell are you talking about?" I let the pause linger, let him sweat. Then I dropped the bomb. "I have everything, the bribes, the fraud, the names, a sharp inhale." "You wouldn't," I smirked. "Try me." The next call came from my lawyer. His voice was tight, but I could hear the disbelief underneath. "They're dropping the charges." I didn't react, didn't celebrate, because I knew exactly what had happened. Valora had yanked every string she had to make sure I walked out of there before I burned her son to the ground. I stepped out of the police station and inhaled the cool night air. For the first time in weeks, I wasn't the one being hunted. I was the predator now. They wanted me erased. I rolled my shoulders, shaking out the tension. Now, it's my turn to destroy them. The night air was crisp, but it did nothing to cool the fire burning inside me. I had walked out of that police station free, but I wasn't naive enough to believe this was over. No, this was just the beginning. I pulled my phone from my pocket, scanning the endless stream of missed calls, unread messages, and breaking news headlines dragging my name through the mud. They were still trying to bury me. Then, a new message popped up at the top of my screen, a name I hadn't seen in days. Isolde. I hesitated. Then, against my better judgment, I opened it. "Meet me. We need to talk. No more games." I stared at the words, waiting for the inevitable follow-up. Some kind of manipulation, some new trap. But there was nothing. Just silence. I should have ignored it. I should have blocked her number and moved forward with my plans. Instead, I found myself typing back 2 words. Name the place. The restaurant was upscale, private. The kind of place where powerful people whispered about things they didn't want the world to hear. I walked inside, scanning the dimly lit space, until I spotted her. Isolde sat at a corner table, dressed in sleek black, looking every bit the polished, elegant woman the world believed her to be. But I knew her better. I knew the woman behind the mask, and tonight I was done pretending I didn't. I slid into the seat across from her. "Talk." She sighed, swirling the wine in her glass before looking at me. "I didn't know they'd go this far." I didn't react. "I never wanted this to happen to you, Zeph," she continued, voice soft, calculated. "I just wanted out. A performance. That's all this was." I leaned back, watching her. "Out? Is that what we're calling it now?" A flicker of something passed over her face, but she recovered quickly. "You don't understand?" I cut her off with a quiet laugh. "Oh, I understand just fine." Her fingers curled slightly around her wine glass. "Then you should understand why I'm here." I said nothing, waiting, and then she dropped the act. "If you walk away now, I can make this all go away," she said smoothly. "No more headlines, no more lawsuits, no more fights." There it was, the offer. She wasn't here to apologize. She was here to negotiate my surrender. I tilted my head. "And let me guess, all I have to do is disappear?" She didn't even blink. "You're a smart man, Zeph. Take the deal. Leave with what little dignity you have left." I exhaled slowly, feeling something dark settle inside me. I wasn't angry, not anymore. This was clarity. I leaned in, my voice low and cold. "You really think I'm walking away now?" For the first time all night, she hesitated. I shook my head. "You think I don't see through you?" And that's when it happened. Her mask slipped, her expression hardened, and for the first time, she looked like her mother. "If that's how you want to play this," she said, voice colder than I'd ever heard it, "then don't say I didn't warn you." I stared at her for a long moment, before pushing back my chair and standing. I didn't say another word. I didn't need to, because I finally saw her for what she was, an enemy. I walked out of the restaurant, my heartbeat steady, my mind clear. They tried to destroy me. I clenched my fists. Now, I'm the one holding the knife. I stepped out of the restaurant, the night air crisp against my skin. Every breath I took felt lighter, sharper. The weight they had placed on me for months, no, years, was finally slipping away. Not because I had escaped, because I was about to bury them. I slid into my car, resting my hands on the steering wheel. For a long moment, I just sat there, the hum of the city filling the silence. Then, I reached into the glove compartment, pulling out my phone. The screen lit up, illuminating the single email draft waiting to be sent. Subject: The Truth. Attached were the files. Everything. Valora's financial crimes, Armand's illegal deals, the undeniable proof that Isolde and her mother had fabricated the abuse allegations against me. They had built their lives on power, manipulation, and control. Tonight, all of it was coming down. I hit send. I didn't have to wait long. The first news alert popped up within 20 minutes, then another, then another. I sat in my dark office, watching as everything unfolded in real time. Breaking news. Valora Vane under investigation for fraud. New report links Armand Vane to illegal financial dealings. Ex-wife of disgraced entrepreneur accused of fabricating abuse claims. I leaned back in my chair, exhaling slowly. I had expected shockwaves. What I hadn't expected was the speed at which their world unraveled. Valora's phone call came first. I let it go to voicemail. Then came Armand's. Then Isolde's. One by one, they reached out, not because they wanted to fix things, because they were afraid. And for the first time since this war began, the fear wasn't mine. The fallout was swift. Valora's empire collapsed overnight. Her allies, once so eager to stand beside her, cut ties without hesitation. She was subpoenaed before the week was over. Armand tried to run. But the thing about running, you can't outrun your past. His business partners abandoned him. His bank accounts were frozen, and law enforcement was closing in. He had spent his life believing he was untouchable. Now, he was expendable. And Isolde, she was left with nothing. No reputation, no wealth, no family support. Everything she had done, every lie she told, every person she betrayed had led her here. She had wanted me to know what it felt like to lose everything. Now, she finally understood it herself. I stood outside my old home, watching from a distance. The lights were still on, but everything inside was different now. This house had once belonged to them. Now, it was nothing more than a tombstone for the life they had destroyed. I should have felt victory. Maybe, in some way, I did. But beneath it, there was something else, something heavier. I had won. But at what cost? I exhaled, running a hand through my hair. I didn't just survive them. I destroyed them. And for the first time in months, I wasn't sure if that was a good thing. I walked away from that house, my footsteps quiet against the pavement. There was nothing left for me there. No more battles to fight. No more enemies to destroy. The war was over. And yet, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. Not regret, not guilt, just an emptiness. I had spent so much time fighting, so much time surviving, that I had forgotten what it felt like to simply be. The cafe was quiet, the hum of morning conversations blending with the soft clatter of cups. I sat by the window, a coffee in front of me, scrolling through the news. Valora, Vane, socialite turned outcast. Armand Vane under federal investigation. Isolde Vane disappears from the public eye. I set my phone down, exhaling. It was done. Everything they had built, everything they had used to destroy me, was gone. Valora's power was nothing now. Armand was running out of time before the law caught up with him. And Isolde? She had vanished. I told myself I didn't care. I had no reason to. But then, as if summoned by the thought, someone slid into the chair across from me. I looked up, and there she was. She looked different. No designer clothes, no carefully crafted elegance. Her hair was pulled back, her makeup absent. Just a woman. Just Isolde. I waited for the fight. The sharp words, the venom. But she just sat there, fingers wrapped around the edge of the table, staring at me. "I thought I would hate you for this," she said quietly. Her voice was different too, lighter. Like the weight of pretending had finally crushed her, and she had given up trying to hold it together. "But the truth is," she let out a small, tired laugh. "I did this to myself. I didn't speak, because what was there to say? She shook her head, looking out the window. I was so sure I was right, that my family was untouchable, that you were nothing. Her fingers drummed lightly against the table. I see it now. What I became. She let out a breath. What they turned me into. I studied her face, searching for deception, for an angle. But there was none. For the first time in years, she wasn't playing a role. She was just tired. She looked at me then, something unreadable in her expression. Do you think, in another life, we could have made it? The question hung in the air between us. I thought about it, about who we had been before the lies, the power plays, the betrayals, and I almost wanted to say yes. Almost. Maybe, I said instead. A small, sad smile ghosted across her lips. But this is the life we got, I added. She nodded, understanding, no more begging, no more pretending, no more trying to fix what was already broken. Just two people closing a chapter. She stood first. I didn't stop her, and this time, I didn't watch her go. The city stretched out beneath me, the skyline lit with the glow of a new morning. I stood on the rooftop, breathing it all in. The weight was gone. For the first time in years, there was no one pulling my strings, no one controlling my fate. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I glanced down at the message, a name I hadn't seen in a long time, a business deal, a new deal, a fresh start, a clean slate. I smiled slightly, sliding the phone back into my pocket. The past was done. Now it was time to live. I turned toward the horizon, the wind cool against my skin. I wasn't just free, I was finally myself again. Life has a way of breaking us down, testing every part of who we are. But in the end, we're not defined by what we lose. We're defined by how we rise. I didn't just survive. I didn't just fight back. I became something stronger. If my story proves anything, it's that no matter how much they take, you are never truly defeated until you stop fighting. So, if you've ever felt lost, betrayed, or beaten down, remember this. Your story isn't over yet. If this resonated with you, hit subscribe. There's more to come.